Who's there? Welcome to Valley Stories. Today I'm going to tell you about the cemetery of my youth. Now, as I've said before, I lived on a small farm in an old house with lots of outbuildings, shed, and a big barn. And across the road there was an old cemetery. And it was over here. There was a wall in the front, and then there were gravestones of all kinds, and some were quite impressive. I think what was called an obelisk, maybe? I'm not sure. But anyway, it was a pretty impressive cemetery, and it dated from the 1800s. Now, the house where I live was built in the 1850s, and some of the graves in the cemetery were even older than that. Now, the cemetery, if I can draw this, there was a wall in front, not that neat of course, and huge trees, again because it was an old cemetery, huge maple trees. And there was, I think there were actually 2 gates. Something like that. And then the wall on the other side of the gates. So myself and some of the people that, 2 of the people that I played with a good share of my youth, used to spend quite a bit of time over there. Now, the cemetery, I'm just going to explain, the wall was built of just various field stones. The lower part was that, were just taken out because where I lived there were stones everywhere. And of course all of the fields had to be cleared in the 16 and 1700s to farm. And then on the top would be big slabs, and probably, and they were pretty flat on the top. They probably were just essentially chiseled out. I've seen this process done where they take stone and they drill a bunch of holes in it, and then they have little wedges and they keep driving them in, and finally the stone will cleave along a pretty flat surface actually. But I do know that what they put on the top were pretty, pretty flat. And they would even have some stones. They'd try to pick ones, and I probably haven't drawn this real well, but they'd actually try to pick some stones that were fairly flat on one side, because you would find that, to build this wall. And of course there were, lots of, like I said earlier, just lots of gravestones in the graveyard. Now, in the cemetery, there were lots of monuments, and especially the ones that had, like I say, I think what's known as an obelisk. Now, of course, when I was little, that's not quite right. A lot of them had an angle like that. And a lot of them would be built up on a base like this. And then many times there'd be other gravestones around them. And what they would be is there were a lot of them built like this. They actually had sort of like a fence around it. They would have these, again, these cut stones that would be, you know, on the ends, sometimes in the middle, depending upon how long it was, but they would have a chain, and that would be bolted, and I'm not going to try to draw the whole thing, but it would be bolted in on the ends, and of course it would sag in the middle. And what there were hanging from those chains were these metal bells. Now, most of these bells, the clapper was gone. Every once in a while we'd find one where it still had the clapper in it and we could shake and it would make a noise. What we would do, because we learned at quite a young age that their hornets would like to make nests in these bells. Perfect place for them. So we had gotten stung quite a few times with these. You know, we'd get by these bells, and especially a lot of times we'd like to look at them and that sort of thing. Well, of course, the hornets didn't like that. And anyway, what one of us would do, we would go up to the bell, and we would stand real close to the chain, and we would hold it up sideways. I should have put our feet down here. We weren't nearly that tall, though. Then another child, another one of us, would stand so that when they had held the bell up, we would be out quite a ways, because boy, if those hornets came out of there, we'd want to be able to be quite a ways away from them. And they would look inside the bell to see if there were any hornets in there. Now, we also learned with this, because again, when we did this, we got stung a few times, and we learned a couple of things. First of all, the person who was lifting the bell, they were in the most dangerous position. So what we learned to do was to stand with our back right against the chain. Once we started doing that, we rarely got stung. And the child who was looking into the bell, they learned to stand quite a ways away, and if a bunch of hornets came flying out, or if even one of them came out, we would run away as fast as we could, and usually not get stung. And there were lots of other things we did in there. We played in there a lot. Always enjoyed it when they put the flags out there on Memorial Day to the veterans. That was always fun to go out and see the flags. And sometimes my grandmother or my parents would actually let us take a flag out of there and play with it. And of course we had to put it back. Then the other thing, a couple of other things I wanted to mention about that. There was one of these fancy gravestones on a site, And it was the inventor of the revolver. Sometime, I can't remember, in the 1800s. There's a, whoops, should have a cylinder here, but that's okay. And this inventor supposedly had their patent stolen by Colt. I think we've all heard of the Colt revolver. We'll put his name around here. I don't remember what his last name was. I suspect what actually happened, now I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that probably the inventor, and I don't remember what the inventor's name was, I knew it at one time, was probably afraid, excuse me, the inventor probably sold their patent to Colt. I don't know. And it could be that they sold it for just a few dollars, and that's why people say Colt stole it. But I don't know. I suppose I ought to look up the history of that. I guess where I lived up there out in the country, that was our one claim to fame. Now, the other thing that I always found interesting, because, of course, like I said, you know, all of us children, you know, there we used to play in the cemetery, so we never really thought about this. But there were some people that were actually afraid of going to the cemetery, especially at night. I mean, again, sometimes we'd go over there and play at night, but some people were afraid to go into the cemetery at night, and were even afraid to walk by it. Maybe they ran or something, I don't know. But I guess they would have beads of sweat running down their face. That's not a good face. It's not good sweat. But anyway, because they were so afraid of the cemetery. So anyway, that's the cemetery story. I really appreciate your watching. You can like, comment, and subscribe below. And I hope you have a blessed day. Bye-bye.